Hi dreamers, let's dive into the E in dreams, and it stands for expenses. As I've said before, this series is going to be a little more personal as I attempt to answer the question many of you have asked, which is, how did I get the capital in the first place to invest that 1.5 million or 3 million net worth? Now, if you haven't seen the intro, D, or R videos for the series, I encourage you to go back and watch those first, then this one. Let's continue the story and lessons. Literally, this is the formula for how I got there, and each letter is a critical piece. So here we go with expenses. It's not a sexy topic, but I'm going to make it interesting for you. In fact, at the end, I'll tell you about how I reduced expenses just in the last 60 days. So I bet you will leave with at least one new tangible idea on how to reduce your expenses right now. I bet you. So here's the deal. Let's take a look at what the average US household spends by category. And here you see things like healthcare, education, entertainment, personal insurance, food, apparel, savings. But take a look at this over here. Housing, transportation, and food make up 63% of the average US household expenses. And I bet you, if you think about your own expense budget, those three items will be the biggest on your list as well. So I'll use the analogy of rocks, pebbles, and sand in a jar. From an expense perspective, if you want to make sure that the rocks, pebbles, and sand all fit into the jar, you don't start with the sand or pebbles. Things like what you're spending on clothes or that Taylor Swift concert ticket you want. What you really need to focus on is to pick the size of your big rocks first, and then all the little rocks and sand can fill in to hit your budget line in the jar. So if you pick very large rocks in housing, transportation, and food, you won't have as many little rocks that you want. And the crazy thing is that people try to cut out little rocks and sand everywhere, like Starbucks lattes, cutting out a streaming subscription. But really what matters most on your balance sheet is those three big rocks. Think about it this way. Let's think about three people. One person makes $50,000 and has $30,000 in expenses. The second person has $100,000 and $80,000 in expenses. And the third person has $250,000 in income and $230,000 in expenses. Each of these people managed to save $20,000 a year that they put into dividend stock. And let's assume that those dividend stocks have about a 5% yield. What this means is that each of these people are on the exact same investing track. You see, it really is all about how you manage your level of expenses relative to your revenue or income. So what did I do in my younger life? I looked at tons of apartments, like a lot, and picked the best value, usually smaller, but nice and a good location. And when a landlord increased on rent, I'd look again and move if it made sense. For transportation, I bought used for a long time, but this last time I switched to new and hung on to it for about 10 years. My current BMW is about 10 years old, and for food, I would always use coupons and try to think about balancing maybe 1 to 2 nicer meals a week, and the rest of the time being easy, cheaper meals. So the first lesson is, focus on those big rocks. Really think about ways to get them down. What are you willing to sacrifice to start to pull ahead and get your footing? Don't get me wrong, little rocks matter too, if you have a lot of them. But these big rocks are really going to form the foundation of the expense side of your balance sheet. But here's the deal. Are you ready? This is a lifelong activity. Once I started getting into my late 30s, I started thinking, man, I can let off the gas just a little bit. I thought, I don't want to die with millions in the bank. That is not my goal. So I started spending more on nicer food, more on travel, more on people, and more on experiences. We had trips to Africa, trips to the Bahamas, Hawaii, Europe. I even spent almost $1,000 on a Valentine's meal one year, which, by the way, is still one of the best meals I've ever had. But one learning recently with my sabbatical this year, or trial retirement, or whatever you want to call it, I had to check myself a bit. I realized I had difficulty cutting back, which I talked about in a previous video. So I did another experiment last month. Are you ready? I said kinda flippantly on Twitter that I wish I could find another $5,000 of passive income. The reason is because my total passive income at the time was getting close to $85,000 with dividends and real estate, and my expenses are about $90,000. So I just really wanted to get to that crossover point. And one person answered, just find $100,000 and you're there, as a reference to 5% dividend stock yield, which $100,000 would get you there. And you know what I thought? Yuck. Another $100,000 of working time? Ugh. But wait, what if instead I scrubbed my expense side and looked there for the $5,000? I haven't done that in a long while. So instead of starting with thinking about the things that I have to give up that I enjoy to get there, I started with a list of things that I hate paying for or wouldn't miss as much. And I specifically like looking for any kind of subscription or reoccurring bills, because that is an expense saving strategy that is forever. I started by looking at my grocery bill and figured I could pretty easily shave off between $100 and $300 a month, just simply not going exclusively to Whole Foods and mixing in other grocery stores, not doing Instacart anymore, and simply using coupons that get sent to me in the mail again. Then I decided to tackle my phone bill, which had just recently been increased by Verizon. I thought, wait, I have a relative who works for T-Mobile, and I simply asked him if there were any deals and said I wanted to lower my bill. To my surprise, he had a 20% off for life and never raised the bill for life passes that he hadn't used this year, and he gave me one. That will save me about $500 a year forever. Then I started scanning my other bills. Recently, my bug bill had increased too, and I realized that since taking down a big tree recently, we actually had the bug problem kind of disappear. So I decided to cancel it and can always have them come ad hoc instead of steadily coming all the time. That saved me another $500 a year. The next thing I took a look at is my taxes. I started talking to my neighbors about the garbage tax and the property taxes. I was just comparing notes for what their tax bill was like and if they had any tips and tricks. And you know what? I found out that I was overpaying. There had been an error where they were double charging me for garbage every year. So not only will I get a $500 credit this year, I will have that savings forever now that it's fixed in the system. And I also have a new game plan for my property taxes next year, which could save me thousands. Another thing I took a fresh look at was my credit cards again. I found that I use a card that gives me 1% cash back, and I decided to move to another card, Fidelity, that gives me 2% cash back. So I opened up a new credit card and now will mostly use that one. Just by making that move, I gained about $400 there. So basically, with some phone calls, conversations, and creative thinking, I quickly got to $2,200, so about 44% of that $5,000 goal. And that only took me about a couple of weeks, and certainly didn't take me all the hours of work that I would have to have done to raise $100,000 in order to kick off $5,000 a year. And I'm certainly not done. I'll continue to go down all the categories and check out alternatives. Next up, probably insurance, natural gas, and TV. So the overall lesson is, take a fresh look. It doesn't matter what stage of life you're in. Pay attention, because it's your hard-earned dollars going out the window. Sometimes you're paying for things you don't even like. Think of it as a tune-up, and maybe set aside a day or two every year for it. And get creative, get resourceful, ask around for advice. And when companies raise your bills, challenge them. Ask them, what are you getting in exchange for that increased cost? And ask them for a discount or deal. If nothing, think, is there an alternative? Okay, that's enough on expense control. You asked how I got to be a millionaire, and legit, each one of these is a stepping stone. It's taken focus, dedication, and discipline. So, what in the world could A, M, and S stand for? All make up the exact equation I focused on to get here. The next video in the series will be the A part of the equation. What do you suppose it is? Thanks for spending time with me today. As a reminder, I'm not a financial advisor, so keep in mind these videos are for entertainment and inspiration only. I'll see you on the flip side.